Alright, this is Big Boss at Foxhound Woodsball, coming to you from Fort Lauderdale and from my blog page at outerheavenpaintball.blogspot.com. I'm also repping my friends over at Acid Tactical, so you can check them out over at acidtactical.com. Now, for this particular video, we are discussing camouflage. We are discussing the history, particular patterns from time to time, as well as the science behind it, the techniques, as well as how to camouflage yourself, your gun, and your gear. Now, this is going to be applicable for all manner of tactical paintball, airsoft, as well as those guys who are the prepper, survivalist types. So, as always with a lot of my articles, for you guys that have been reading them, I will be discussing the history of them as a way for my readers to appreciate where everything comes from, and my video work should be no different. But first, a word from our sponsors and friends over at Acid Tactical. You can check them out over at acidtactical.com. And remember, when the shit hits the fan and you gotta trust your gear with your life, ask yourself this one question: can your gear survive the acid test? Anyway, I'm gonna kick off the video, but first, word from our sponsors, and we'll be right back.
Camouflage, originating from the French word camoufler, which means to conceal, to deceive. The principles of camouflage have evolved for eons, everything from ancient hunters to modern combat. Camouflage is as ancient as formations of organized armies. However, for the military, it took a while to catch on. However, it's still one of the more primal aspects of humanity as a species when it comes down to hunting, and it has also evolved into its own unique distinction from what the military uses. So with that being said, when we think of the principles of camouflage, it doesn't matter whether we're hunting or we are in the tactical environment itself. The principles are still the same. Cover and concealment, being able to break up the outline at a distance or up close, and at times for your average soldier this may be those few precious seconds before contact with the enemy is initiated. And for all of us paintball players, as well as our airsoft friends, this could be the difference between shooting out your opponent or going to the dead box. For humanity, the ability to observe and observe how animals behave was one of the key things that allowed us to become the ultimate apex predator on planet Earth. This, in terms of camouflage, started off as the most simple yet the most effective. In this case, early hunters wearing animal skins. Now, we always wore animal skins early on as a form of clothing. However, many hunters figured out they could use that as a form of camouflage, and this is where it kind of really began. And as we progressed through the years, we also learned to observe. Case in point would be this picture here. Native American hunters noticed that bison herds did not fear wolves, so many Native American tribes that hunted bison would wear wolf skins to hunt. That is, until more professional organized armies came about. No other army on earth was feared like the Roman Empire. As this picture shows, this shows a formation of Roman soldiers. Now, these kind of formations have been around since before the Romans, and they were around long after the Romans, with the exception of the Dark Ages and the years after the fall of Rome. However, when European armies began to reconstitute themselves for the 100 Years' War, so on and so forth, rigid formations made a comeback, and that didn't change with the introduction of firearms either. However, armies continued to fight in these kind of rigid formations behind their battle standards and bright multicolored flags. Reason being was that these kind of formations were needed so that way battlefield commanders could discern who belonged to what side during a chaotic combat environment. This was especially true in warfare such as America's War for Independence and the American Civil War, where casualties in one day equaled all of that of Vietnam. We all know the Civil War was the blue and the gray, north and south, but as pictured here, this uniform was a stark exception to that commonality. The men in this picture here belonged to a Union combat unit under the command of a firebrand officer named Hiram Berdan. To get in this unit, you had to provide excellent references as to your character and your marksmanship capability. A lot of ways, these were the Union Civil War commandos, but they're particularly snipers known as Berdan sharpshooters. Now, this was technically a camouflage, but in the years following that, especially with the British Empire, they switched over to a khaki uniform by the time of the Second Boer War, where the British Empire were fighting for control over their South African colony against South Africans of Dutch extractions called the Boers, and they organized into loose formations called commandos. Ironic, isn't it? When we look at it, World War I was a war defined by carnage. Tactics have not kept up with technology, and stubborn generals can only think of mass bayonet charges right into the maelstrom of a machine gun. This was characterized on the Western Front with other weapons such as poison gas, the airplane, so on and so forth. For the soldier, on average, they were doing just about everything they can to survive this carnage, and for the early part of the conflict, a lot of experimentation was being done, and they would resort to smearing mud on their guns and gear before patrol, so on and so forth. However, this leads us to our first item. As you can see pictured here, this is supposed to be a chameleon suit. It's supposed to be a form of camouflage. Not that dissimilar from the dazzle pattern that we see on ships during this period and into World War II. However, this one was more or less a failure right off the bat, and too bizarre for anyone to really take seriously. The other side of the coin on this one would be what we see here. This is an early ghillie suit. This was a group of guys in the Scottish Highlands, particularly Lovat, Scotland, and the term ghillie, translated from Gaelic or Scottish, means man. And this was pretty much a net or a article of clothing with strands of jute and burlap on it, or that was tied onto a net. This was pretty much the early sniper as we see it today. What are pictured here are some examples of camouflage patterns that were done in the field on the individual infantry level. This example right here and the next one coming up are classic examples of what would have been done by the Germans, as these helmets here are the 1916 model Stahlhelm. However, this wasn't relegated to just the Germans. As you can see here, this particular helmet was done with a Brody or USM-17. As far as camouflage development goes during the interwar years, not much was done in terms of the US and the Allies in terms of camouflage, with the exception of very crude stuff as you can see pictured here. On the other hand, Nazi Germany in the years leading up to World War II began a massive comprehensive camouflage development program. As you can see here pictured, a camouflage uniform worn by a soldier of the Waffen-SS. Now, only two types of German combat units were authorized to wear camouflage, that being Luftwaffe Fallschirmjäger or paratroopers and the SS. Some examples would be this splinter pattern, as you can see pictured here. This would be a good concept and one of the more popular options depending upon the area. Then you had this 44 dot pattern, which was also a classic among the SS. Many would speculate that this pattern became the pattern that is used by today's Bundeswehr, which is pictured here, i.e. Flecktarn camo. Okay, what you're seeing here in this picture are American soldiers wearing what is called the frogskin pattern. This came out for the US about the same time we were getting into World War II on the massive scale. Originally used by the Marine Corps raiders when retaking the New Georgia Islands, it was later used by American infantry in some units on a limited scale during Normandy. However, that was quickly discontinued after a few friendly fire incidents with the SS. Now, this camo pattern had a green side as pictured here for jungle operations and a tan side flipped over for beach landings, but could also theoretically work in desert terrains. This pattern later became used for a lot of duck hunting patterns in the 50s, but as pictured here, used by American advisors in Vietnam.
Okay, first off, the most recognizable thing for people is a weapon. Now, this all black one out in the woods, it would definitely be noticeable. Its shape is that distinctive. We all know what a gun looks like. How do we break this up? We've got several options. We can do gun wraps. We can spray paint this thing. Now, I'll show some pictures of some spray painted weapons as examples. Okay, that's an example of spray painted weapons. Now, what about other options as far as breaking up the outline of this gun? One thing, you can always use something like this. This is the mesh camo scarf. You got this one I got years ago when I was beginning to get into the more tactical element to paintball. You've got your woodland camo on one side, and you've got olive drab on the other. Something like this works great. You can use either side or both depending upon how you wrap your gun up to help mask the outline of this weapon. So what you do is you take one end of the scarf, tie it around your barrel. Let me get this done right here. And because this isn't exactly a uniform or consistent thing that you do for one side or the other, this will help mask the outline a whole lot easier, especially if you've got parts of it that show up as camo and the other sides that are just olive drab. Now, when it comes down to hopper feds, you want to make sure that this can also cover the hopper to break up the outline of the hopper, but also make sure that if you're doing magazine fed or firearm or actual firearms, make sure that nothing would get in the way of your manipulating your magazine release, your charging handle, especially if you've got a outwardly reciprocating charging handle for some of your legacy style paintball markers like your 98 customs and the like. You want to make sure with firearms it's not interfering with an ejection port. And voila, this would be something that you can be used for sniping. This could be used something for recon or general camouflage. Plus, because of the little grids in this can also be used to protect your optics from that also problematic shine. Just put it over your optic and you could be able to see through the little grid spaces in here, which would also help break up any chance of light reflecting off the lens and giving away your position further. Another option would be camo wraps that we'll see in another picture with the other part of our silhouette breaking up ability right here.
Okay, discussing silhouette, and we're even going to cover shine as well. Screw it. As you can see, camo ghillie hat. I could top this off with a top piece for a ghillie suit. I've got the gun wrapped up in a ghillie ammo wrap to help break up the outline on that one, as I was explaining earlier with it. However, also pay close attention to my mask. I've got a camouflage mesh scarf wrapped around my mask so that way the skull isn't that visible and the light won't reflect off the paintball mask lens especially. You can do this with optics as well.
Okay, now as far as silhouette goes still, human beings are identifiable by the head, neck, and shoulders. These are indicative to how people see each other. They recognize another human being from distance. Now, in that concept, you have to break up the outline of the person. And this is definitely a sniper's domain, though it can carry over to more individual troops in some ways too, which I'll explain later on. But one thing to break up your outline, you could always ghillie up your boonie hats. You can also do this with patrol caps, helmets if you got camo netting, because even a boonie hat could be noticeable at distance. But as you can see, I actually handmade this net years ago and just eyed in the jute. That way I could use it for sniping. I could take this on and off a boonie hat as I please, especially for the kind of games I do and camos I run. So putting this on, this is how it's supposed to be. This allows you to easily keep the sun out of your face, but there's enough of this jute around that it will break up your outline, especially around the head, neck, and shoulder area. And fitted with additional ghillie would constitute a ghillie suit. However, a lot of fields don't allow you to use ghillie suits for one reason or another. This, however, a camouflage boonie hat, might be considered a gray area. Now, with that being said, you could do plenty more with stuff like this. And let's move on. Okay, another form of camouflaging is going to be camo netting. This is one of those 6x8 nets you could get at your military surplus. You can get this on eBay, Etsy, Amazon. This is the cheapo shit that's probably made in China. It's that PVC type material in a woodland camo pattern, though it definitely work for RNs. But actually, come to think of it, this looks more like, color-wise, more like a green dominant ERDL, but I digress. Now, this is something you use when you're building a listening observation post or LPOP. You can use this for such things as camouflaging your gear, your campsite. This is something that you could use as a basis for a ghillie suit. You cut it up, you put it on what you want to make into a ghillie. However, because of its design, this also works as its own makeshift ghillie suit. So, you can practically lie in wait with something like this and have this draped over you. You could use something like this set up as a makeshift sniping post with it, and because of how big it is, it's easy on and off. You can practically hide in something like this, and if you have to get out in a hurry, you definitely could discard it and bolt if you needed to in a real world combat situation. However, us paintball and airsoft players will probably use it, hold on to it, and this would definitely work for most of our tactical purposes. So keeping this in your kit is definitely something that should be considered because of its wide range of uses.
We see the hunter line up his shot. Hunter's decked out in camouflage and he hunts for his prey, then lines up the shot. Here, we see a Special Forces operator getting ready to engage targets. Now, look at their camos. What is the difference? How about this one? This is an example of Vietnam-style tiger stripe. And, on the other end, this tree bark pattern. Well, to put it mildly, this is what we call passive and aggressive camouflage patterns. As you can see with the hunter, how it almost blends into the environment. Now, in this one, we have a soldier wearing the multicam pattern. Still blends in, but in a different way. Moving on, we can see an example here. When it comes down to particular hunting camouflages, this one being a real tree, you've got a foreground, you've got your middle ground, and you've got your background. Your middle ground is slightly blurred, and your background is definitely blurry to simulate distance. The same can be said for this duck hunting pattern. As you can see, it's almost particular for grassland. That's the thing the hunting community has over the military. It's regionally specific camouflages for the seasons. Military, on the other hand, with this example of a woodland pattern, is more of the aggressive style. The hunting patterns are your more passive styles. Okay, pictured here is British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher with members of the 22nd SAS Regiment, and yes, for anybody who asks, those are big-ass flashlights on those MP5s. Now, here's the thing. Uniforms. All black. Now, for some who are just getting into the more tactical elements of paintball, how is black a camouflage? Well, mainly nighttime operations or clandestine shit. However, during the Vietnam War, as we're getting into as a prime example for black as a camouflage, the Viet Cong, the VC, the People's Liberation Front, they wore black. It helped them look more like villagers. Now, as well as it being a camouflage, it was due to good chunks of Vietnam being thick triple canopy jungle, so at high noon you need a flashlight to go through some of these places, so that worked too. And for American Special Forces like Navy SEALs, MACV-SOG, stuff like that, black worked great, not just for operating in those triple canopy jungles or even at night as well, but at a distance they looked like Viet Cong guerrillas, so when doing missions over the fence, it probably bought them those couple seconds to survive. However, if they were captured wearing black uniforms, they can be considered spies and forfeit the protections of the Geneva Convention regarding the humane treatment of prisoners of war. Paintball masks come in a wide range of colors. Typically you're going to find black as a standard. However, for all you guys that want to camouflage your masks, you do have options, such as this one here. You can find them in woodland, tiger stripe, or any other camouflage pattern as well, but then you got this stuff. Players will always find ways to customize their stuff to either stand out or do their own camouflage patterns and paint them by hand. I know I've done that myself, as you can see coming up right here. Yep, that's mine. Skull pattern, did it freehand. Pretty damn good. But then you got these guys. You take some latex masks from a Halloween shop, go to town with it with some adhesive and zip ties. You can have a lot of fun with this. This would definitely be covered under a fear and intimidation thing.
Okay, as you can see, got my Highland Tactical Ballistic Pack out. This thing has replaced my Alice rucksacks as my go-to backpack for my Woodsball needs, my Milsim needs. Now, one thing to take into consideration, I've got my pouches hooked up here. These are the M81 Woodland. However, with this does break up the outline and a good bit, because you've got your camo pattern, you got your solid camo color here. But with that being said, how else can we plus up the camouflage on this without painting it? Well, you've got pack covers. You can find pack covers anywhere. These are also called tire covers. They've been out on the market for years. They're in woodland or in 6-color, 3-color desert, the UCP, and I believe now OCP. So you've got your options there. If you like running your multicam, you can grab the OCP. If you still got your old ACUs and you like that one, you got the UCPs, you got your woodland, your 6 and 3-color desert. Throw that on here. If you need to make it a little tighter, that one can be modified with some paracord and a cord lock. You're good to go, but I digress. Now, you want for camouflage, as far as what we were talking about sound, stuff like that, this has a lot of snag hazards on here, but that's the thing. You've got also these little elastic bands that are on the straps, roll these up, get them under these straps, keep them in place. If you don't want to do that, a roll of electrical tape or duct tape will work. However, make sure it's done in a way to allow yourself to be more modular and be able to adjust this as you need it. Another thing to take into consideration, waist belts. This one, if you watched my review on it, you know why I'm not a big fan of the waist belt on here. So that's one thing I would definitely tape down because I normally don't use it, but that's also something that I'd want to keep adjustable for down the line if I decide to use it, if I'm just using the pack alone. However, that being said, for snag hazards, stuff like excess strappage on here, this stuff will catch onto stuff and it will drag neighboring foliage. Any good sniper worth their salt will pick up on that. So keep that in mind when you're doing your camo checks. Make sure there's not any excessive noise by this thing moving. Tighten this up as much as you can. Tight packs or light packs, and we'll be moving on. Alright, with that being said, I could do more styles of camouflage in terms of variety or different forms of camouflage. However, this is just a practical application of it for your milsim guys, either paintball, airsoft, or you guys that are doing more real steel tactical shit. Other than that, if you want a written version of this, check it out over at outerheavenpaintball.blogspot.com. You can also check out Outer Heaven on Teespring. And don't forget to check out our friends over at Acid Tactical at acidtactical.com. And remember, when the shit hits the fan, you've got to trust your gear with your life. Ask yourself this one question: can your gear survive the acid test? Well, anyway, this is Big Boss, and I'm out of here.